Hello, my name is Christopher Renstrom, and I'm your weekly horoscope columnist here on Astrology Hub. As we come to an end of 2023 and look forward to 2024, we will be taking a pause in our regularly scheduled content. Astrology Hub has been offering more and more content over the past few years, and the time has come to step back and to reevaluate. We have received so much great feedback from this community in our recent survey, and we're taking it all into consideration as we work to find a new balance and a new level of quality to the content that we will be presenting to you in 2024. In our break from our regularly scheduled content, we will be broadcasting holiday features throughout the month of December. Meanwhile, I want to express my deepest gratitude to all of you for watching Horoscope Highlights and for being supporters of Astrology Hub. It's your curiosity and your passion for astrology that has brought us this far. Now, sit back, enjoy today's episode, and I look forward to seeing you in 2024. Hello, my name is Christopher Renstrom, and I'm your weekly horoscope columnist here on Astrology Hub. And this week, I wanted to talk to you about my upcoming predictions for the year 2024. Like last year, I would like to sort of generally outline it and show you how the year progresses by touching on each of the signs as we deal with each of the particular and significant planetary combinations. The first feature of 2024 will be the entrance, or really, I guess I should say the re-entrance, of Pluto into the zodiac sign of Aquarius on January 20th. Now, this is something that I've been getting a lot of questions about, worried questions about even, mostly from Leos and from Scorpios and the occasional Taurus, which is, what is Pluto in Aquarius going to do to me? You know, there's always this kind of fear factor whenever we're dealing with the planet Pluto. It also kind of shows up whenever we're dealing with the planet Saturn. And that's because these planets are basically planets that were associated with the end of things or the passing of things. Until the discovery of Pluto in 1930, Saturn was basically associated with the termination or the ending of things. And then, of course, with Pluto's discovery in 1930, being named after the Roman god of the underworld, everything dealing with the underworld, with the termination, with death, with decay, was associated to Pluto. So, what does this mean with Pluto entering Aquarius on January 20th? Does this mean the end of civilization as we know it? No, it doesn't. It means a lot of things, but one of them is not the end of civilization as we know it. First of all, the thing that I like to tell my clients when they ask about Pluto entering into Aquarius, I like to remind them that we've essentially had a dress rehearsal for Pluto entering the zodiac sign of Aquarius. And that dress rehearsal was when Saturn was traveling through the zodiac sign of Aquarius. And this is the thing that I find very comforting about astrology. Sometimes we think of time in terms of a book. You know, that we turn the page, we've come to the end of a chapter, and now we're turning the page and we're moving on to something else, as if everything that's come before has suddenly been rendered obsolete. Well, I like to sort of think of time as one of those redwood tree trunks that I was shown when I was a wee lad, when I was in my salad days, when I was green with youth. We would go on these sort of field trips when I was a kid, and one of them we went to the redwood forest, which was a wonderful thing. Got to experience that in California, but they would show a trunk, and they would show in this trunk that with each year there was another ring on the trunk. So this is, as the tree grew larger, the trunk grew wider, and you could actually see the entire story of the tree, the entire history of the tree by viewing the rings on this trunk. Not only that, I mean, it was like add another ring. Okay, that sort of makes sense. But not only that, but by looking at the different rings, they were able to say, well, this is when there was a fire, or this is when there was a drought. they were able to sort of point out the different passages of time or what was going on at that time by examining the rings of the trunk of this tree. And in a way, that's what the planets do with us in astrology. They don't say, flip a page and we're starting a new year and forget everything that came before. What the planets do is that they kind of take a bird's eye view of our world, and they get to, they're higher in the sky than we are. And they sort of look at the rings that we've accumulated and are accumulating here on planet Earth. And that's the way to sort of see the passage of the planets. Oftentimes, it doesn't happen all the time, but oftentimes with a transiting planet, and a transiting planet basically refers to where the planet is right now in the sky versus where it was in the sky when you were born. That's your horoscope. So transiting planets are how the planets have moved since that horoscope was initially constructed or seen, since your birth sky, all right? So we can see that actually planets will combine with one another, and in some cases, they will build on themes. When we had Saturn enter Aquarius at the end of 2020, I think it was like mid-December of 2020, and it was there for 2021 and 2022. Aquarius, we know, is a zodiac sign that's very much concerned with society as a whole. Okay, so it's an air sign. It's the last of the three air signs, and Aquarius will stand in for society. And Aquarius's adage is that a society is only as good as the people who live in it. Sometimes we might think, oh, society, that makes me feel so anonymous. I'm not my own person. I'm like one of many. And as far as the Aquarian point of view is, yes, you are one of many, but you are still special. But not only special, you kind of have a duty. Remember, Aquarius is Saturn ruled. You kind of have a duty. You kind of have an obligation to make society a better place. And so each one of us is charged with bringing something to the table that's going to benefit society or make society a better place. Now, some of us might have access to huge swaths of populations, and some of us, it might just be in our simple day-to-day lives with neighborly exchanges. But this idea that society is only as good as the people in it, this is really sort of an Aquarian maxim. And what we learned when Saturn was moving through Aquarius during the COVID outbreak, when we were all basically under some sort of degree of lockdown on the planet. I mean, it was the first time in the history of our world that the entire planet was locked down. And a lot of people, reacted to that. But what was really going on is, how were we taking this on as a global society? And one of the things we began to see is that we're not homogenized, that there were certain societies that were better equipped to deal with the pandemic and certain societies that were not. And so what showed up was a discrepancy between the haves and the have-nots. And then it was the people who had jobs that they could probably do remote or from home versus the ones who had to be right on the front lines giving service. And so that was another discrepancy. And so the question became, how were we going to handle this crisis together as a society? And Saturn, being the planet of tests, gave us a grade. And I think we passed, but maybe like barely. All right. In other words, we could do a lot better. All right. But the thing that we understood is that society is made up of societies, and each one of us contributes to society as a whole. So with Pluto, which is a very powerful planet, moving into the zodiac sign of Aquarius, it's picking up where Saturn left off. Saturn kind of showed up and gave us a test to see how well we did. Yeah, it could have been better. Okay. So, and then Pluto is now coming in and saying, all right, now you have to work with this. You have to build on this. Aquarius is about society as a whole, but Aquarius is also a utopian sign. And what I mean by utopian sign is that it asks the question, what would make a perfect society for you? Okay. And each one of us has a different idea of what would be a utopian society. And as you can imagine, no three people are going to agree on what that is. So Pluto, being an Aquarius, is going to take on the big picture. This is what needs to be done to make society better. All right. And so it's going to bring out these utopian impulses in all of our countries and in all of our cultures. Some of our cultures might respond with what's going to make society better is a green planet. Others might respond with what's going to make society better, everything being technological, everything being uploaded. Some people might be like, well, I think folksy furniture might make society a better place. And other people might be like, I'm completely Scandinavian in my tastes. Streamline everything and make it sheer and modern. Okay, so we're all going to have these different ideas of what makes a society a better place. And during this time that Pluto is in Aquarius, it's going to bring that about. Can we coexist? Can we cohabit? That goes from being, little childhood books that we got in the first grade of like how to get along with Cindy, into some very real economic and global and moral questions. How do we get along on a planet in which it's basically shrinking? We've gone as far as we can go on the planet. So now we have to sort of turn around and ask how we are going to all get along. Are we going to play by the old rules, by those who are privileged with money and power and those who are underneath? Or is that going to get flipped? Or is it going to be the oldest rule of all, which is you go through periods of time where you have revolution and change, only to find that you're back at the same predicament again, but with different players? These are the questions of Pluto and Aquarius. So as Pluto enters into Aquarius, it will immediately square or challenge the three other fixed signs. Okay, it's going to challenge Taurus, it's going to challenge Leos, and it's going to challenge Scorpios. Okay, so Aquarius is going to come forward with, this is the way that the world should be. That's literally what Aquarius is coming forward with. And it's going to arm it with ideas of what's futuristic and what's technologically superior. And there's going to be a lot of like future, a lot of modernize, and a lot of sort of let's lift our gaze from the human plight and put it in numbers or algorithms or something along those lines. All right. And so this is going to sort of be the Aquarian bent that can take on a life or death quality to it, because that's what Pluto does. It raises the stakes. It makes things life or death. Well, the first problem is obviously going to be with Leos. Leo is the planet, is the zodiac sign of I've got to be me. And so it's being opposed by Pluto, which is, well, you are one of many. And so Leos are not going to take kindly to that whatsoever. They're going to be like, one of many, excuse me. And one would think, okay, Leos are going to lose their Leonine-ness. Okay, they're going to lose their uniqueness, their specialness, their authenticity, for lack of a better word, as Pluto sits opposite them. But actually what I've seen happen with oppositions is that the opposing sign kind of flares up and becomes more powerful in its resistance. All right, so many Leos may find with Pluto moving opposite, like, no, I don't feel like giving that up about myself. No, I don't feel like genuflecting. No, I don't feel like just sort of going and standing in a group over here. I need to be heard. I have something to say. I have life experiences that need to be recognized, and they need to be recognized now. Okay, so there may be this a pushback coming from individuality, from people who are like, we're not selling ourselves into a crowd think. Okay, we are individuals and each person is separate and different. And so this might become something that becomes a very powerful struggle. And if you're Leo, particularly in the first early months of 2024, you may feel like your authority is somehow being superseded or that is being eroded in some way. Now, you could react by insisting on your authority and saying, I'm in charge or something like that. But we're dealing with Pluto, so we're dealing with the underworld. So there is going to be an erosion that takes place underneath that. And what you as a Leo are going to have to find in yourself is what about yourself is an authority, okay? You have to rethink it. You might find yourself all of a sudden strangely out of step or out of touch or out of sync. That someone is eroding your authority and you're going to fight them back. Well, you have to ask yourself, what is an authority? For some people, it might be like, authority is short for authoritarian. Okay. And so it might be more like that, type of thing. For others, it should be, well, it's my authenticity, it's my genuineness. And for others, it might be a question. I'm not sure what an authority is, and let's find out. Okay, so this is going to be a theme particularly for Leos. If we move over to Taurus, which is going to be squared by the Pluto entering Aquarius on that January 20th, a Taurus is about what I have. Okay, it's like this belongs to me. And so there may be a struggle because it's a square with the feeling that someone's trying to take away what you have. Maybe they're trying to take away your money. Maybe they're trying to take away your property. Maybe they're trying to take away your clout. Okay, so there's this feeling that, well, this was given to me, or this was bequeathed to me, or bestowed to me, or I fulfilled an application and got this. And then in the early months of 2024, there may be this feeling that is being taken away or it's being redistributed. And as a Taurus, you're going to be like, no, it's not going to be redistributed. Okay, so again, you could resist and say it's not going to be redistributed and I'm holding on to this no matter what, or you can ask yourself, what is owning? What is owning about? Why is my ownership being challenged in this way? And then it can be about you trying to figure out, like, well, is it worth it to own this? Or if I'm owning this, how does ownership look now? Like, am I taking away from someone else? Is my ownership encroaching on someone else's territory in some kind of way? So these will be the big questions for Taurus. As a Taurus, when you're facing Pluto like this, you have to do better than it's mine. Okay. It's yours because you're doing something wonderful with it. You're benefiting other people. And this will be the thing with Aquarius. Aquarius will be looking for those people. Pluto and Aquarius will be looking for those people who have included others in their corner of the universe. Okay. If you're just doing it by yourself and solo, you may find yourself walking around with a bullseye on your back. Okay. So this idea of how do you work with other people? What is your place in the karmic ecosystem? This is going to be a big question, okay, as Pluto is forming this square to Taurus. Finally, Pluto will form a square to Scorpio. And so what does Scorpio feel like it's going to get taken away with Aquarius? Scorpio and Aquarius have a very particular relationship. Both signs are very much about truth, okay? For Aquarius, truth is in the heavens. It's eternal truths as articulated by Plato. These shining truths. What is justice? What is truth? What is beauty? What is good? These shining truths that live as ideals. They live as stars up in the heavens, and they're meant to guide our lives. As we ask, what is truth? What is beauty? We look to the stars, or we look to the ideal. And the first thing we see is that we don't live up to that ideal. But then what can we do to lift Earth up to heaven? What can we do to lift our lives up to that ideal and to embrace it? Okay, because these are eternal truths. They're not going to change for you. You're going to have to change for them. That's the Aquarian idea of truth. Okay. The phrase truth sets you free ultimately. So this is why Aquarians believe in transparency. Scorpio's version of truth isn't so idealized. Scorpio's truth is, truth is based on secrets. Okay. So if we're going to talk about truth, let's talk about what's being covered up, what's being withheld, what's tucked away in the socks drawer of your chest of drawers, what's tucked away in the corner of your closet. Is it something you don't want anyone to see? Is it something that, you're embarrassed about? Every Dorian Gray has a portrait that's tucked away in an attic or seller somewhere that tells the real truth. And so this is Scorpio's relationship to truth. Truth isn't some shiny ideal. It's the thing that everyone's not talking about. It's the thing that people are trying to foist upon someone else. I'm like this because you made me do it. That sort of thing. So Scorpio's after the ugly, gritty truth. And since Aquarius is associated to the heavens and Scorpio is associated to the underworld, you can see how that works out. So what's Scorpio going to be saying? Scorpio is going to say, well, I like this ideal of utopia or society that you're talking about, Aquarius, and how you want to make that happen. But how exactly is that going to happen? And are you standing this society on feet of clay? Is it really as resplendent and as shining as you make it out to be? Because after all, and Scorpio will always invoke human nature in terms of history, with its many battles and wars and dominations and invasions, tells a very different story about shining truths. And shining truths are often used to restrain or to defeat somebody else. And then, of course, again, there's always that little fact that history is written by the winners and not by the losers. So Scorpio also has that. It's going to hold on to those things that people don't want to talk about. It's going to hold on to those inconvenient truths, those sullied truths, those things that nobody wants to look at. We're coming to an agreement here. That's a detail. We're going to partition that off and get rid of it. And Scorpio's like, no, you are not. This is a very important thing. So this is something that each of the fixed signs may be experiencing in the first 4 to 5 months of 2024. Finally, we're looking at Aquarius. Aquarius is used to sort of seeing itself as a blank space. It has a tendency to really put the consensus or feelings or thoughts of other people first. So the idea of becoming a powerful figure is not something that sits well with Aquarians. They can do it if they're doing it in service to a truth or an ideal or a game plan or in service to science and math. Okay, but once you put the human element in it, and Pluto will always put the human element in it, Uranus, which is the modern ruler of Aquarius, never wants to put the human element in it. It must be the universal element. Okay, Pluto will always be like, we are all born into bodies that ultimately die, and they puke and they poop and they need to be fed and they have to have sex. Okay, so Pluto will always bring that element to it. And so when Pluto moves into Aquarius, there's going to be more of a feeling of having to fill in the space with a self, a very strong self, and perhaps at times a very domineering and perhaps bossy self. So this is something that Aquarians are either going to be working with in a creative and potentially torturous way, a conscience that they have to answer to, or this may be something in which Aquarians have decided, the means justify the ends. These are the goals that we need to get to. And if we have to bring everyone in line or get rid of some people, then that's what's done. So again, there's always a sort of underworld or even a diabolical edge to Pluto when it enters a sign. It shows the things that sign doesn't want to show or even know about itself. So a very powerful date is going to be the first conjunction of Pluto and Mars on February 13th, but I want to loop back and get that later. So we've talked about the struggles and the squares, but who is Pluto going to benefit? All right. We talked about the other points on the compass of the fixed signs circle, but who is Pluto going to benefit? Pluto in Aquarius is going to benefit air signs. Okay, so where Aquarians may be struggling with this sudden sense of like, I need to be in charge, okay, either by taking over a leadership position or resisting, okay, the two Aquarian reactions there. Pluto in Aquarius is going to benefit Geminis and Libras, and it's going to benefit Aries and Sagittarius, okay. These are the other two air signs, Gemini and Libra. And then the fire signs, Aries and Sagittarius. We talked about the struggle with Leo, which is the third fire sign. That's because Pluto will be opposite it. So what I mean by benefit is that it will be trining the air signs, Gemini and Libra, and it will be sextiling Aries and Sagittarius. And what's wonderful about this is that there will be suddenly this sudden surge forward for Geminis and Libras, that they're going to feel really like the wind is at their back, that it's filling their sail, that they're really kind of like advancing and moving with something. Maybe it's an idea, it's a project, it's an endeavor, it's a relationship, but they're really moving forward with something, and they're making headway. Okay, and so this is going to be very, very strong for those two signs. For Aries and Sagittarius, what Pluto and Aquarius is going to introduce are some very profound and inspiring questions that the Aries and Sagittarius can't just sort of say, well, that's the way it is. Pluto and Aquarius will say, you have to do better than that. And so Aries and Sagittarius are going to sort of be thrown back on their way of thinking, on their way of being, on their way of approaching something. They can't just say, well, that's me in the moment, or I just happen to be passionate, or my intuition took over. They can't just do that. They're going to have to come up with a reason why they're doing what they're doing. And the other thing that's going to be a big learning curve for the fire signs is Pluto is now in Aquarius. So you have to work with other people. Okay. Fire signs are more like, I'm the star, I'm in charge, I'm in the lead. I have to do what's true to me. Okay. Well, when you've got Pluto in Aquarius, you're going to be dealing with personalities that are just as strong as you, that are just as dynamic as you, and people who can make introductions or to help you get to the next level. So learning to work with that is going to be a very strong lesson, again, for the first 4 to 5 months for the fire signs, particularly for Aries and Sagittarius. Then we come up on our first set of eclipses. There is the lunar eclipse at 5 degrees Libra on March 25th, and the solar eclipse at 19 degrees Aries on April 8th. If you remember our last set of eclipses, which took place in October and November, that was really rough going. And particularly the planets that were traveling through Libra, which began in early October and continued into November when they kind of switched into Scorpio. That was a very violent and a very troubling and a very turbulent time. The Libra energy was still very strong, but in that regard, the Libran energy had become eclipsed. And so what had been a balance, or at least a head off, was thrown out of balance, off balance, and a lot of Mars energy came on through. That Mars energy is coursing very powerfully. It didn't start then. It's been around. I mean, you can notice that there's a lot more hostility and a lot more really hostility. It's more than indifference. It's people getting very angry with one another. That's really gone up quite a bit. And so when we come around to these eclipses again, there is going to be an attempt to rebalance that energy. And so this is primarily what these eclipses will be about. This could be more conflagration or more difficulty or more conflict. We are dealing with Aries being an eclipse. But what I find interesting is that the Venus, which rules the Libra eclipse, is in Pisces, and the Mars, which rules the Aries eclipse, is in Pisces. And so I think what we may actually be dealing with here is some imaginative solutions to conflict. In other words, really trying to rein in those energies and to try to move them in a more perhaps constructive way. And so that's kind of what I see around there. But where everything was thrown out of balance in the past eclipses, which were in October, November, we're going to have a rebalance. We're going to have a response to that takes place in the spring.
If you're someone who craves more soulful connection during the holidays and you're ready to set some powerful intentions for your life as we enter 2024, you are in for a treat this holiday season. You are officially invited to the 12 Days of Solstice Challenge, a free guided intention setting journey through the moon cycles of 2024, led by yours truly. To learn more and secure your free spot, head to astrologyhub.com/solstice. Let's start 2024 with more confidence, clarity, and intention than ever before.
Now, Jupiter is winding up its stay in Taurus, and Jupiter is in Taurus for the first 4 months, or 5 months really, of 2024. And so what that means is that if you're an Earth sign, like if you're a Taurus or a Virgo or a Capricorn, this is when you really want to be completing endeavors, completing proposals, bringing them to a close. That doesn't mean like, I'm done with my business, but like if there was improvements that you had to do with your business, a rethinking that you had to do with your business, you want to be doing all of that review and reform during the time that Jupiter is in Taurus, because that gives you a protective energy and also a fostering energy. So by the time it switches into Gemini, which is May 25th, you really want to, have houses sold, houses purchased, money changing hand, funding locked into place, enterprises secured. Okay, so you really have the first 5 months of 2024 that if you're going to move or relocate or change careers or take your business up another notch, you want to be doing it. This is not a period of time where you want to be beginning something. Okay, this is a culminating energy for the first 4 months, 5 months of 2024. So you want to make sure that you're bringing things to a close. And if that means selling off, you're selling off. Or if you took it to the next level, you've got it on the next level and you're assured of its sustainability. That's what you want to be focusing on if you're born under those elements. The same thing would be true for the water signs as well. So because water sextiles Earth, and so that would also be something there for you as well. Now, Jupiter will conjoin Uranus, Jupiter, which is a planet associated to prosperity and anything that's big. Okay, Jupiter will conjoin Uranus, the planet of revolution and change, into Taurus on April 20th. And what's interesting about that April 20th date, this is like a sort of like once in a lifetime conjunction here, in Taurus. What's fascinating about that conjunction is a lot of times, one would think, okay, Jupiter conjoining Uranus, it's something that's revolution and change and it's going to be on a big thing and maybe it's a collapse. What you could also see with the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction there, and it could be a collapse, right? Because Uranus will shake something down to its foundation. Uranus's deal is to go and kick over the game board and send all the pieces flying. And so if you have Jupiter coming up on that could be associated to a collapse. But what you can also have with a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction like that is reform and rehabilitation that's done on a very large level. Jupiter has a very strong rehabilitative, a strong reforming energy. And so when you combine Jupiter with a Uranus, Jupiter can kind of take those revolutionary energies and move it more in the direction of let's not destroy what we've built, let's reform it, let's make it better, and let's rehabilitate it. And so that might be a very powerful time. For instance, we might see the economy improve during that period of time, maybe sort of it has been slowly improving, but that might be a period of time in which it's more showy, in which it's more like, okay, we've got these things coming through and things to celebrate. The reason why I'm sort of optimistic about this, and I should commit to that. I shouldn't be like, the reason I'm sort of optimistic, it should be like, the reason I'm optimistic about this. Okay, so Christopher's put on his Jupiter cap. The reason I'm optimistic about this is because you've got the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction on April 20th. It's followed by a Jupiter-Sun conjunction on May 18th. And then it concludes with a Jupiter-Neptune sextile on May 23rd. So really that whole April 20th to May 23rd window, it's kind of like these planets are passing Jupiter before Jupiter leaves. I could see it as being actually very positive and culminating in a positive way. A note that I made earlier, this conjunction on April 20th caught my eye because April 20th of last year was a solar eclipse in Aries at the 29th degree of Aries. And so eclipses, typically a solar eclipse will rule a year. In some texts, it rules 2, but you will see a major or dramatic life change or direction. So basically, that life change or direction lives for a year. And so when we come back to this April 20th, it's kind of like, okay, how dramatic was that life change? How much did it affect things? It should have been very dramatic at 29 degrees Aries. But here we've got this conjunction of Jupiter and Uranus. It's not in Aries, it's at 21 degrees Taurus, but they're both kind of like spring signs. So it's kind of like what departure or beginning began in April 20th of last year, and where has it ended up? And what kind of radical shift has it brought? How has it changed the rules? Did it kick over the game board, or did it move the goalposts? And these will be the questions that are going to be uppermost in mind when we have this conjunction on April 20th. And then, because it's followed by a Sun-Jupiter conjunction, then a really beautiful Jupiter-Neptune sextile, really at the last degree of Taurus and at the last degree of Pisces on May 23rd, I actually see that as a window of stability, but more stability. It might even be validation for people who, put forth radically different ideas, or who took a risk, or flying blind, and then they sort of like ended up on the other side, and it's like, I'm glad that worked out, but I could see that as being that sort of window period. So it would have been based on the eclipse of April 20th, lasts a year, and what has a reshuffling of priorities, a reworking of rules, a changing of the game, of the playing field. What has that resulted in? And that question will be answered between April 20th and May 23rd. Again, this is going to be really, really terrific for people born under Taurus and Cancer. Virgo gets to benefit from this because of its trine to the Jupiter. Scorpio gets to benefit from it because of its trine to Neptune, which is very close at that point, and then Capricorn and Pisces. So Jupiter enters Gemini. All the Geminis are excited about this. Jupiter enters Gemini on May 25th. And all the Geminis are like, it's my turn, it's my turn. It's Wheel of Fortune, it's click, 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 and it's coming up on the big prize. So all the Geminis are going to be super duper happy about Jupiter entering their zodiac sign on May 25th. Jupiter, as you know, is the planet of good fortune and higher purpose. It comes around your corner of the zodiac once every 12 years. So if you're a Gemini, think back to what was going on in your life 12 years ago, and you'll have some idea of what's going to be going on with Jupiter. And so Jupiter is bringing new people, new things, new opportunities. And again, it's that feeling. And we already started with Gemini. Gemini was already starting to feel this Pluto and Aquarius filling the sails. Well, Jupiter will really fill those sails when it enters your zodiac sign. So it does bring good things. There's 2 of them, both benefics. Venus and Jupiter bring good things, but again, Venus and Jupiter bring good things usually through other people or through outside forces. So with Jupiter coming into Gemini, as a Gemini, not only will you see fortunes improve for your partner or anyone that you're in a relationship with, but the whole idea of partnering or collaborating is going to be important for you. But this is Gemini partnering and Gemini collaborating. So Geminis don't partner with just one person or collaborate with one person. Each person that a Gemini talks to is a creative collaborator. Okay. And so there's going to be a feeling of like, oh, this person gets me here. This person can make introductions there. This person like really feeds my brain. this person really takes care of my body with massage. So it's going to be different creative collaborators that are entering into your life. Jupiter is really, simply put, the planet of God in astrology. It's how we experience God is where Jupiter shows up in our horoscope. Do we experience a judgmental God? Do we experience a pantheon of gods and goddesses? Is God math, or is God militant? Is God compassionate and giving? So there's going to be 12 signs that Jupiter can be in, and so there are going to be 12 different expressions of God in an astrological chart. So when you've got Jupiter going through Gemini, God shows up in the people in your life. Okay. And it goes back to this beautiful Quaker idea that each one of us was made in the image of God. And so we carry an inner light. Okay. So it's almost like each one of us, we're not made in the image of the God, like, God looks like me, it's like, no, we're made in the image of the God because each one of us carries a light inside of ourselves. You can almost think of it as a candle. And so we carry this inside of ourselves. And so we may encounter someone who looks different than us and we might think is foreign or different or hostile or whatever. And it's in those moments that we need to see that this person is God too. They're just coming at, this person is God too. And we have to find the godliness in that person as well. Now that's starting to sound a little Piscean, like sort of like, and that's done through street ministries and administering. No. The way that Jupiter works in Gemini is I can meet God in any conversation that I have. Okay. Any conversation that I have is a mouthpiece of the universe. Okay. Is the universe talking to me? Okay. And with Gemini, it can be very playful and it can be typical. And it can be like someone says something that day that puts you in a great mood or solves a question or. And so this is the beauty of Jupiter moving through the zodiac sign of Gemini. It's very conversational and it's very camaraderie, and it's getting along with people. But Gemini likes to mix it up, and this is kind of like what I love about Gemini is like one of the many things I love about Gemini. Gemini likes to introduce you to people that you wouldn't normally talk to. So it's the person that you're stranded on the bus with, it's the person that you're stranded at a bus stop with, waiting for a bus, or it's the person who walks out of the garage because you're having car failure and you need some help with it. Okay, so Gemini energy will introduce people that you wouldn't typically come into contact with. Okay, and they're going to change your point of view in some way. It's not going to be an epiphany. It's not going to be like a burning bush. It's not going to be like heaven's parting. It's going to be like Joe, the grease monkey. Or it might even be a question that a student asks or something. But it's that little sort of divine spark and divine recognition. But it's done on a one-on-one basis. It's done in a typical real life day-to-day basis. And so this is what Jupiter in Gemini does. So Jupiter in Gemini is also going to, like I've been saying before, it's going to benefit people born under Aries and Leo. They will also have similar experiences like this. And it's going to benefit people born under Libra and Aquarius as well. The Jupiter in Gemini is going to put a strain on people born under Virgo, and people born under Sagittarius, and people born under Pisces. These are the signs that the Jupiter in Gemini is going to square. With Virgo, it's going to feel like it's being pushed out of the formulaic. Okay, wait, no, this isn't the way that it's supposed to be done. It's supposed to be done like this. So, whoa, stop. Jupiter Gemini is going to be like, there's no stopping. It's going to like push the Virgos out of the formulaic, and so that's going to, clearly put Virgos into a tizzy. But the thing that Virgos need to remember is Jupiter in Gemini, and Jupiter's in Gemini for a year. As Jupiter in Gemini does this, is that Jupiter in Gemini is working those mercurial muscles that Virgos have because they're born under Mercury to improvise on the spot. And to be spontaneous. So Jupiter Gemini is going to come in and say, like, let's go with this. And Virgo's going to be like coming up with all these reasons why they can't do it, but you're on and you have to go with it. Okay. So this is going to be a nice push, but Virgos aren't going to be too comfortable with that. The Jupiter in Gemini, the reason Sagittarians are going to have a problem with it is because it's not enough. Okay. It's like, okay, I got the push, but I need a bigger push. I got the memo, but it needs to be a bigger memo. I want more bang for my buck with this. And Jupiter and Gemini is going to be like, well, that's all you get, and so Sagittarius is going to have to fill in the rest of it. Okay. Because Jupiter and Gemini comes to a certain point, it's kind of like someone saying, I will give you funding to get, think of matching funding. Okay. Well, there's, X amount of money that's available. If this can be from this charity, if it could be matched by donors. Okay. Sagittarians just want the whole amount to be available. Okay. Let's, that's what they want. Okay. The idea that they have to go out there and beat the rushes and find a partner funder. Okay. And that's how I want you Sagittarians to think about it. You're going to get part of what you have to move forward with something that you want, but you're going to have to fill in the rest of that, which means you're going to have to go and find the partner funding, or you're going to have to find a way to fill in the rest. It's not making a little work a lot. It's to fill in the rest, because that's going to rely on the Sagittarians. So it's going to force Sagittarians to actually, sort of pull in an oar here, and make up the difference. This is going to force the Sagittarians to make up the difference if they want to get the fortune. So you're not going to get it on a silver platter. You're going to get it, part of it. You're going to be like, what's missing? And you have to turn the what's missing into what you're bringing to the situation. And then finally, why is Jupiter in Gemini not going to sit well with Pisces? Pisces doesn't trust. It's funny. Pisces can have a great love of humanity, but it doesn't always like humans. I mean, I probably could say that better, but Pisces is really into humanity and people. But then when it gets into people themselves, they can find that disillusioning, or they can find that people aren't really very nice, or that people aren't living up to their romantic ideals or their feelings of what people should be. So Jupiter and Gemini kind of brings Pisces back into the here and now. Sometimes Pisces, for instance, can feel for people who are suffering halfway across the world, but they won't ask loved ones or friends how they're doing that day. Pisces can have a problem with intimacy and with what's going on closer at hand. So Jupiter and Gemini is going to bring in people closer at hand, and it's going to say, you need to show your compassion or your feeling for these people. Or let's say you're a creative Pisces. You may find yourself meeting someone who's just as creative as you, but they're creative in a totally different way. They're creative in a different hemisphere of the brain. And so Jupiter and Gemini is going to be like, well, you're going to have to be more left hemisphere brain thinking, or you're going to have to be more right hemisphere brain thinking if you're going to work in a creative collaboration or business partnership with this person. And Pisces might be like, I'm not, buying this. I'm not signing on for this. And Jupiter in Gemini is going to say, like, the only way you're going to get to where you want to go is by working with this. So there might be unlikely partnerships, peculiar collaborations, or this is the person I have to work with? Question marks over Pisces' head as Jupiter moves through it. But what Jupiter is doing is bringing what can sometimes become a little bit too sacralized down to earth and down into your day-to-day life. With Jupiter and Gemini, God shouldn't be on a faraway mountain peak in Tibet that you have to take a pilgrimage to. God should be someone that you're talking to in line at the local grocery store. Okay, so this is the way that Jupiter and Gemini is bringing this kind of like immediacy to Pisces and making them look for the things that they're looking for, making them recognize inspiration in what's around them rather than in faraway vistas. All right, so now Jupiter is going to form a square to Saturn on August 20th and on December 24th. Saturn, as you may remember, is in the zodiac sign of Pisces. And so Saturn is basically creating tests, trials, and tribulations in the context of Pisces. So, something that we can all recognize right now is that the world isn't a particularly kind place nowadays. We see a lot of suffering that's going on around us. We see it in our family lives. We see it in our neighborhood lives. We see it in our national lives. We see it in our international lives. Okay, but what is our reaction to it? Are we like, oh, I'm so numb to this, or I've got, pain burnout, or something like that? No, Saturn in Pisces is saying there is suffering in the world that we are all a part of. It's not going on somewhere else. And what are you doing about it? How are you commiserating? How are you honoring? How are you recognizing? How are you trying to make the world a better place? Saturn in Pisces also can bring out very much isolationist tendencies and also retreat tendencies. Like I'm so overwhelmed by what's going on in my life. I need to retreat and I need to disassociate. And that can be there very strongly as well. So Saturn in Pisces is always going to be the nagging, it is always going to be the nagging question of conscience of like, okay, you benefited with this. This is a good thing. You gained something, but who lost because of your benefit? Who lost because of your gain? Saturn in Pisces has a real sensitivity to that. There can also be shaming people in pain that takes place with Saturn and Pisces. If someone's like, I'm in pain, and it might be like, well, what's going on in your life? If you want to talk about real pain, look at what's going on with all these other people, or it can be like, you brought it upon yourself, you're a victim or whatever, so there can be a lot of pain shaming that takes place. And Saturn and Pisces is standing up to that. It's saying pain is a universal human experience. And don't shame someone for doing that. And so people who are in distressed circumstances or who are dealing with difficult situations may be feeling with this Saturn in Pisces. I'm not going to just be a doormat. I'm not just going to be silent anymore. I'm going to speak up and I'm going to resist saying, oh, the world's a great place when it's suffering in all these different places and we need to bring everyone together with this. So with Pisces, there's a very strong compassion, and then the Saturn introduces a cynicism versus a reality, and pain is something that's very hard for all of us to deal with, and suffering is something that's very hard. Suffering's hard for those who are suffering. Okay, let's start with that, and then for those who aren't suffering, there's like guilt or whatever. And so Saturn and Pisces stands up for that. And it says, there's a cost to this, and we have to find a way to alleviate suffering. We have to find a way to open the heart. We have to say that a cynicism is that most people's cynicism is just because it's inconvenient, and we have to get past that, and we have to get into very real ways of addressing this, And so this is part of what Saturn and Pisces will stand for. When it squares Jupiter, like it will on August 20th and December 24th, that's going to challenge your relationship to pain and guilt in your life. Those are two really heavy words right off the bat, but let's just come out and say it. You will be challenged in your relationship to pain and guilt in your life. If you are in pain or if you are suffering, have you closed up into yourself? Are you not allowing others to help you? Or have you brought the door down so that, you reject others before they reject you? So what's your relationship to your own pain and to your own suffering? Because pain, we can become very absorbed in our own survival when we're in pain. When you're in pain, you can't really think much outside of that. But then what's your relationship to it? Does pain make you feel vulnerable, weak? Is that going to make you, in the dichotomy of predator and prey, is that going to make you prey? And so what's your relationship to pain? And then what's your relationship to guilt? Do you feel guilty about being in pain? Do you feel guilty about having caused someone pain? Do you feel guilty about not caring about pain, or that's why you deliberately look away? So Jupiter in Gemini is always trying to bring things back to the conversational and the day-to-day, and then you're dealing with an isolating or a retreating Saturn. And so they don't have to find a way to coexist. It's a square. They can continue bashing each other over the head with bats, but at a certain point, you may seek out what is the conversation here? How can I acknowledge that there's pain and suffering, and also acknowledge that there is a world where there isn't pain or suffering that's taking place, and how do we bring them together? So really questions of like, what is my relationship to pain? How do I treat people who are in pain? How do I treat people because I am in pain during that period of time? And then also, what's guilt to me? Does guilt close me off? Or does guilt open me up? Guilt can do a lot of closing people off. Oh, I feel guilty about this, so, I feel bad enough, I'm not going to listen to you. And it's like, no, you need to come out of that guilt hole that you've crawled into, and come out and get rid of that guilt so you can be part of society again. Again, this theme of being part of society is really, really strong. Pluto being in Aquarius, Jupiter being in Gemini, this looking to one another, for companionship, for support, to show up, to alleviate, to assuage, to appeal, to heal. This is really what this air sign energy is doing. It's like, take it away from, the great parental agencies in your life, and look to the other people in your life. And how do you show kindness? How do you show pain? What's your reaction to those? These are the things that are going to be stimulated very, very strongly here. Saturn in Pisces is going to bring Saturn is in Pisces throughout 2024. So that brings a gravitas to Cancer and to Scorpio, as well as to Pisces. And so this brings a sort of emotional steadfastness. Sorry, I had to break that down in the syllables. That was like, I don't even know if that's a word, but it's an impossible word to pronounce. Okay, a steadiness, okay, that Saturn brings to that. The water signs are comfortable with being melancholic. They're fine with it. The other signs, not so much, okay? Taurus doesn't like being melancholic because it's a downer and it makes you unproductive. And Virgo would prefer anxiety instead of melancholy. Cancer, for all of its mothering energy, can get melancholic, okay? Whether it's like the child going off to school or to college, or time is passing, or little ones are growing too fast. Cancer's not immune to melancholia. Scorpio wrote the book of Melancholia, okay? And Pisces can do melancholia like, musical scales. Another sign that benefits from melancholia actually is Capricorn. Okay, so Saturn in Pisces, brings that sort of melancholia. And with melancholia comes deep feeling and profundity. And so it will operate in those ways. But there are other elements that aren't so comfortable with that melancholia. It's seen as a downer, or it asks uncomfortable questions. And so that might be something where the Saturn runs afoul. Now, I want to make a special note here about Virgo in 2024. Virgo may feel like it's lost its momentum when Jupiter leaves Taurus on May 25th. Virgo has been dealing with Neptune being opposite it since about 2012. Okay, so Neptune is right at the end of Pisces right now, and Saturn is right at the beginning of Pisces as 2020. It's retrograded back down to zero as 2024 opens for Virgos. So Virgos are kind of feeling at sea. Sometimes they feel kind of enamored about being at sea, and sometimes they feel like adrift, feeling at sea. As Neptune finishes up or winds up its opposition in Pisces, it gets to 29 degrees Pisces. Virgos are feeling like there's all these doors that are opening, or these options, that are opening, and all of these possibilities, but they're not sure if they should pursue them. And then we get to Jupiter and Gemini, which is pushing. And so that, but then what Saturn, as it moves behind you, is that Virgo, for every door that you open or window that you open or option that you explore, Saturn is closing the doors behind you. In other words, you move forward, you have to move forward, but what Virgo is going to experience is that options they thought that they could go back to are no longer there. So that's what I mean by Neptune is leading you forward, exploring different, ideas, and Saturn quietly behind you is closing the door or closing the window. This is no longer an option. You can't go back to this, and so there's going to be a lot of emphasis on the decisions and the choices that Virgo makes. Let's talk about 29 degrees. We have two modern planets that are hanging out at 29 degrees this year in 2024. And it's very important. Neptune will be at 29 degrees Pisces from May 3rd, 2024 to September 3rd, 2024. 29 degrees is a radical degree. It's a very extreme degree. It's where things really sort of come to a head. And it's supposed to be in order to, step over the threshold into a beginning. But that's not what's going to be happening, because Neptune gets to 29 Pisces and then it tarries. It lingers there. It retrogrades back. And so for many Pisceans, there's going to be this feeling like things are coming forward to an ending, but then it kind of hangs out a bit, so it can be this pressure to move forward, but it's still not lined up right. And that can be very frustrating, particularly for Pisceans, but it can also be very profound. And I'll get to the profundity in a moment. Pluto is hanging out at 29 degrees Capricorn from January 1st to the 20th, and then from September 4th to November 19th. Neptune is at 29 degrees Pisces and stops being at 29 on September 3rd. Pluto is again at 29 degrees Capricorn on September 4th. What you have there is this sextile. Capricorn and Pisces get one another. Capricorn is an earth sign, Pisces is a water sign. So you've got this sextile. And this says a lot to me. Because what's going on here, we're going to go into such a big radical shift in 2025 when Neptune enters Aries and Uranus enters Gemini. That's going to be a whole shift, okay? But if you do a critical or dramatic shift like that, it can be too much. It can overwhelm. It can be, I can't, deal, or I can't deal with this, And so what's happening with the planets, and this is the beauty of the modern planets, is that they introduce the idea of the shift, the transition gradually. It's kind of like a little toddler who's going into a pool for the first time. You don't take the toddler and throw them into the deep end, okay? They start with a step, and they maybe laugh or cry. They laugh and clap their hands, or they cry and want to leave the pool. But they start with a step. They start in the shallow end. They get used to the idea, and this is what these beautiful sextiles between Neptune and Pluto are doing. They're getting you used to the idea of something new, but they're also asking you to pause and reflect on the things that you are leaving behind, and on some of the things that you may not want to leave behind, and that you may want to take with you as you cross over that threshold into the 2025 planetary complexion of all of those aspects. So there's going to be a lot of asking what worked and how do I repackage it? How do I reformulate it moving forward? There's that idea of reform again that's taking place. But these degrees are going to be sort of like punctuated degrees. So the good punctuated degrees, okay, when this Neptune at 29, Pluto at 29, where it's really powerful and very profound. A good day, for instance, is May 23rd. Actually, May 23rd may very well be the best day of 2024, okay? Especially for Taurus, Cancer, Capricorn, and Pisces. But May 23rd, you have a Venus-Jupiter conjunction at 29 degrees Taurus. Venus will be sextiling Neptune at 29 Pisces, and Jupiter, because it conjoined Venus, will be also sextiling Neptune at 29 Pisces. That's all on May 23rd. So that is an extremely powerful day. You have the benefics in conjunction, which is always a wonderful thing. Venus is the ruler of Taurus, and then Jupiter is the co-ruler of Pisces, and it will sextile Neptune. All of that happens on that day. So this May 23rd of 2024 is like a superior day. It's like a really, really great day. And because the planets don't always do things exactly on the day, you want to sort of take it in the week running up or the 2 weeks running up to that conjunction. But best day of year is May 23rd, 2024. It's followed by July 11, where Venus trines Neptune again at the 29th degree. Venus will be in Cancer at 29 Cancer, Neptune at 29 Pisces. And then you've got on July 20th, Mars sextiling Neptune with Mars at 29 Taurus and Neptune at 29 Pisces. So May 23rd, July 11th, and July 20th are really like superior days for in 2024. Your watch out days, your what I call the duck and cover days, rise and shine are the good days and duck and cover are the bad ones. Your watch out or watch it, days are going to be June 16th, where Venus squares Neptune again at the 29th degree. This time Venus will be at 29 Gemini and Neptune will be at 29 Pisces. So this could be a very treacherous period of time. August 28th, you have Venus opposite Neptune. Venus is at 29 Virgo, opposite Neptune at 29 Pisces. So again, that can be a very sort of like, I'm being led to head left, but actually I should have gone right. Or if I go right, then maybe I want to go left. So that can be a crossroads period right there, that August 28th. September 2nd is one that is also potentially misleading or treacherous. That is when Mars squares Neptune in retrograde. Mars is at 29 degrees Gemini, and the Neptune is 29 Pisces. On November 3rd, this is a hard day, and it's kind of playing into the energies that were going on in the October-November of 2023. On November 3rd, you've got Mars at 29 Cancer, opposite Pluto at 29 degrees Capricorn. And that could be kind of like the final and perhaps very adversarial conclusion to some sort of dispute. And it can happen at that period of time. Now, Venus conjoins and trines and sextiles, and Mars does this all the time with these signs that I've just told you about. They've been doing it for years. What makes these dates so critical is that they're doing it at the 29th degree. Okay, you're not going to see Neptune is the modern ruler of Pisces, remember. You're not going to see Neptune in its own sign doing this again at the 29th degree at these particular places. Subsequently, we're going to be having very powerful periods of time, very potent periods of time. And these periods of time are going to be so potent because just as the 29th degree is representing the end of a sign, the following dates I'm going to be sharing with you are taking place at 0 degrees Aquarius or at 1 degrees Aquarius. It's taking place at a very potent pocket because of that Plutonian energy. So very powerful times, particularly if you're an air sign, and more specifically, if you're an Aquarius. We've got powerful times with February 5th when we have Pluto conjoining Mercury at 0 degrees Aquarius. It's the first planetary conjunction following Pluto's entrance into Aquarius. On February 13th, we have a Pluto-Mars conjunction at 0 degrees Aquarius. And February 17th, we have a Pluto-Venus conjunction at 0 degrees Aquarius. So these are going to bring beginnings, sudden like in the game. Okay, this is what's going on at that period of time. The following powerful dates, again, this applies to the air signs and the fire signs. I didn't make that distinction before, but if I'm talking air, I'm also talking fire. The following dates are also extremely potent in a good way. March 10th is a Pluto-Mercury sextile. March 21st is a Pluto-Sun sextile. That's a wonderful, what that's talking about is receiving information and being able to put it to good use. Okay, and that's really, really quite exquisite. Then we have April 6th, which is a Pluto-Venus sextile, and that's probably going to be ending what I just talked about with the March 10th and March 21st. So Pluto-Venus sextile could almost be like tying a ribbon on the package. Another potentially powerful time is May 3rd, when Pluto sextiles Mars. That follows Pluto turning retrograde. So for people born under Aries, particularly, and Scorpio, this might be a reversal of something that was going in your direction, and now you have to like work with the new developments that have been thrown in there, or you have to scramble to get what you can get and then cut your losses and move on. And so that's going to be May 2nd, May 3rd, and that's going to be impacting particularly Aquarius and Scorpio. There are lovely trines on May 22nd and May 25th. There's a Pluto-Sun trine followed by a Pluto-Venus trine in Aquarius, and this is wonderful for relationships for all the air signs. This will continue on June 2nd and June 4th, where you have trines to Jupiter and Mercury. Why am I singling these out? Because these are like the first trines or preliminary trines that Pluto is making to these planets. So it's almost kind of like virgin soil in a way. It's very powerful. It's very, very good. July 21st is also good for Aries and Scorpio. August 29th for the Venus-ruled signs. Okay, as we get into August is going to be a month that one wants to be very careful because there's a lot of conflicting planetary energies at that point. They can be combative. And you've got Pluto in opposition to the sun. And that's going to be something that kind of felt keenly, almost kind of seismically through everyone's lives. September brings the eclipses. On September 18th, we have a lunar eclipse at 25 degrees Pisces. That's the first eclipse of the Pisces Virgo cycle. Okay. We're winding up the Aries Libra cycle, and that's the first one of the Pisces Virgo cycle. So certainly a lot of Pisceans and Virgoans will be reacting very powerfully to that, especially if you're born towards the end of Virgo and of Pisces. And then on October 2nd, we have a solar eclipse in Libra. That's getting back to a rebalancing energy, which probably is going to be responding to the kind of disruption that August will be bringing. And so this is going to try to amend that idea. And as we go into the fall, we have Pluto coming out of retrograde at 29 degrees Capricorn. It's re-entered Capricorn on September 1st, and it comes out of retrograde on October 11th. So again, we might want to sort of make a window around the September 1st to the October 11th. This may be something in which there has been a walking something backwards, or a sense of sliding backwards, and maybe almost sort of like yielding to it in a way. Maybe almost kind of like, oh, I can't put up this fight. I can't put up this resistance. I can't keep at this anymore. It's kind of like the boxer in the last round of a boxing match who's gotten completely, slammed. All right. So there can be almost a feeling of defeat. On this October 11th can almost be a sort of resurgence. Think of Popeye opening up a can of spinach and gulping it down after he's been beaten to or whatever, pulped by Pluto. Okay, so Popeye gets the spinach, and all of a sudden it's like, and like the little hornpipe sounds off, and he's got biceps with little anchors or something like that on them. Okay, so this Pluto coming out of retrograde at 29 degrees Capricorn on October 11th is really, really powerful. So whatever sides have been feeling defeated, whatever sides have felt like they're giving up the game, or that they've lost all the progress, if you feel like you lost all this progress, around the August period in 2024, this is almost like, you got your second wind, you got your can of spinach, you're ready to push on forward. And so it's a very, very important note that I want to make there. What it also means is there may be this feeling that people have thrown the baby out with the bathwater. In other words, with all of the appeal of Pluto and Aquarius, tomorrow is a better day than today, future oriented, make everything, towards the future and revolution and wonderful. It's things of the past that hold us back. This Pluto retrograde back to 29 Capricorn reminds everyone that there were a number of things about the past that were good, and that you can't build the future from a blank slate. It can't be done from, a zero. Okay. That you have to build it on everything that has come before. So what you could see here is things that have been introduced prematurely going up in smoke, whereas things that, that were kind of like holding on to the end suddenly get a second burst of life. Okay. And so this is kind of like, it's almost kind of like the last gasp of Capricorn here, but it's not getting rid of Capricorn, because there's all this like, get rid of Capricorn. It's more sort of like Capricorn is passing the things that you need, the things from your past that you need to move forward. This isn't getting rid of the past. It's coming to an acceptance of the past, seeing the past not as a day of reckoning, but as something something that deepens you, something that nurtures you. The past is associated with how mature the roots of your tree are, and unless a tree has strong roots that root it down in the ground, if you have huge winds, a tree can be easily uprooted. And so there may be a feeling of things being uprooted in that August and September period. But then, and a feeling of sliding backwards, but then all of a sudden there's this surge of energy that grows from the past, that stands for things that people would say are traditional, that stand for things that are rock solid and good, not traditional and like, traditional values, a judgmental way, but things that have stood the test of time. That's really what I'm talking about. So that there's this extraordinary change around of disposition that comes to a head on November 3rd, when there is a Pluto-Mars opposition at that 29 degrees Capricorn, at that 29 degrees Cancer. And because that's an opposition, I have to say that that's going to be a time of great reckoning, a time in which it's kind of like, a realization of like, what are we doing? What have we done? And let's take some steps back, and we have to face some things about ourselves, our behavior, about our actions that aren't easy to face. But if we don't face them, then everything's going to go to hell in a handbasket. So it's really kind of, it's very powerful that way. I mean, to have Mars at 29 Cancer and Pluto at 29 Capricorn for the last time on November 3rd, it's a very, very powerful day. So what's being set up here with this Mars at this critical 29 degrees of Cancer, this critical degree, and Pluto at this 29 Capricorn, a critical degree. It's an extraordinary opposition, this on November 3rd. Well, that's all going to be tied up with Mars entering the zodiac sign of Leo, where it will turn retrograde. So Mars enters the zodiac sign of Leo on November 4th. So it enters Leo right after this critical opposition. And one would say, okay, it's entered Leo after this critical opposition, but it enters Leo after this critical opposition only to turn retrograde in Leo after this critical opposition. So this is a very important event. I'm speculating that there's something that's very critical that takes place on November 3rd. And then you have the Mars entering Leo, and it looks like it's going to parade, forward into Leo and be very Leonine. Maybe there's a feeling of triumph or victory or something along those lines. But then Mars turns retrograde on December 6th. And retrogrades, as we all know, are the not so fast planetary reversals. Okay, they're about faces. And so Mars turns retrograde at 6 degrees Leo on December 6th. So it may feel very triumphant, but all of a sudden it's turned retrograde and it's moving back down. And it's moving back down to the early degrees of Leo, but it actually leaves Leo and it re-enters Cancer. Okay, Cancer, as you might recall, is where it had reached that 29th degree before opposing Pluto. And so that's going to be a whole brouhaha that will be taking place between December 6th and February 24th. Again, this is where you may see leonine things challenged, okay? Leaders challenged, authenticity challenged, birthright challenged, authority challenged. Leo is the zodiac sign of the good fathers. Leo is the zodiac sign of the king. So all of this is going to be challenged. So either, authorities, people in position of power in your life are going to be challenged. If you occupy that, you may be challenged. And what it may also indicate is maybe people feeling that they should be taking on this position and then deciding against it in some way, maybe retreating or moving away from such a thing. It's literally, I mean, you've got Mars and a fire sign, right? So you literally have a hot potato. And so these challenges with this retrograde are probably going to go through February 24th. And everything will finally get on solid ground by about May of next year. So I'm afraid that 2024 is going to end rather dramatically, and that drama is going to continue into 2025. So 2025, 2025 is a game-changing year. In 2025, March 31st, 2025, Neptune enters Aries, and on July 7th, 2025, Uranus enters Gemini, and then we've also got Pluto in Aquarius. So all of a sudden, these modern planets are going to be sextiling one another. Okay, they're going to be in air and fire signs. Okay, this is huge if you're born under an air or fire sign. That sense of forward momentum and self-realization is going to be enormous. But the thing about air and fire is that it can be very quick, it can be very aggressive, and it can be very sudden. And it can move faster than maybe people born under other elements are comfortable moving. Well, the air and fire signs could certainly say, well, with all the time that we've spent with Neptune and Pluto and Pisces and Capricorn, that really slowed things down. Well, all of a sudden you've gone from going up a hill with the brakes on to, in 2025, going down a hill with the brakes off. And so that's going to be an enormous shift. That is why it is so important, particularly with those 29 degree days that I referred to, that as we go through 2024, we really take a look at what we're leaving behind. Is it a good thing to leave behind? And that we choose what we want to take with us. It doesn't have to be leaving everything behind. What about Pluto's stay since 2009 has bestowed something valuable, whether it's knowledge, experience, property, an object, possession, reputation, status, a love, what do you want to move forward with you? But what are the things that we can take with us moving forward into very innovative times? What are the things that we can take forward from 2024 into 2025 that will be sustainable? So what we want to identify in 2024 is what is sustainable and what is good about the past as we move to a very future-oriented 2025. And we want to find a way to marry sustainability with innovation in our dream, in our vision of what a perfect world would be for us to all live in. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Horoscope Highlights. Please don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. Your support means a lot. See you next week.